You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network. For more quality options programs, visit www.theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app, available in iTunes and on Google Play. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.
You wanted it, you got it. A radio program that helps teach you options trading inside and out, basic to complex. This is Options Bootcamp. Remember, options involve risk and are not suitable for all investors. For more information, please read the characteristics and risks of standardized options, available at www.sogotrade.com. Now, let's get you into peak options trading shape. Here are your Options Bootcamp drill instructors, Mark Longo, Dan Passarelli, and John Critchley.
All right, everybody, that rockin' tune means it is time once again for Options Bootcamp, everyone's favorite options educational program, the program where we take all these options concepts you may be familiar with tangentially, you may have heard of, maybe you're a little scared of them, and we break them down in terms that are easy for you, the retail stock trader, to understand, and also show you how you can implement them effectively in your portfolios. My name is Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as from the ever-expanding, ever-exciting Options Insider Radio Network. And if you like programs like this, shows that break down options for the retail trader and explain some basic and even intermediate and advanced concepts, then we have a new one for you on the network I encourage you to check out. It is called Options Playbook Radio. We do that with our friends over there at Trade King. They break down a lot of great concepts in terms you may find interesting, using a lot of sports metaphors, offensive and defensive plays, and it's pretty interesting stuff. Check it out, Options Playbook Radio. It's a short little weekly rundown of an interesting topic, an interesting option strategy that you may want to use in your portfolio. Check it out wherever you find this or any other Options Insider Radio Network program. And of course, while you're doing that, make sure you download our mobile app, available for iOS, Android, even for the Amazon device lineup. A lot of great versions for you guys out there. You can instantly stream all of your favorite episodes of Options Bootcamp, Options Playbook Radio, any other show on the network. You can download them for offline listening. And then if you have a question, if you have a comment, you can just hit that email, hit that respond button in the app, and shoot your question, your comment directly off to the host of your favorite programs. Lots of cool stuff. Check it out, the Options Insider Radio Network mobile app. I think you're going to like it. All right, and joining me as usual on the old Options Bootcamp drill instructor squad, the dark hat to my light hat, the Emperor Palpatine to my, shall we say, Luke Skywalker, none other than Mr. Dan Passarelli from Market Taker Mentoring. Mr. P, welcome back to the show, sir.
Thanks. It's great to be back. I like the new monikers that I've acquired since last we spoke.
I don't know if I like that analogy. I'm not a big Luke Skywalker fan, but I was hard-pressed to think of another light side guy. I guess I fall more in the Han Solo-esque category, kind of the handsome, gruff rogue type.
I was thinking C-3PO.
Oh, yes, that is me also. Very stiff and kind of shiny, and also familiar with about 2 million languages. So that's me. All right, and before we can be surprised any further, let's dive right on into our first segment, the basic training segment.
It's time to get in line. What you're going to do is learn. You're going to learn how options work. Do you hear me? Yes, sir. You're going to learn options trading inside and out, basic to complex. There will be no failures. Do you hear me? Yes, sir. Call in. Prepare to learn. Yes, sir.
All right, everybody. Unlike the intro music, that music always puts me in the mood for 4th of July or some other festive, celebratory summer occasion. Flag Day, perhaps. Take your pick. This is, of course, the portion of the program where we break down some basic options concepts and explain how you can incorporate them into your own portfolio. As we were talking before the show, what would be a good topic for this episode? We decided this is the perfect time to revisit this particular topic in a little bit more detail. We're going to talk about protection, and not like we've done in the past with kind of just blanket protection of how to protect your particular underlying, whatever the case may be. If you want more information on those, of course, we've done some great episodes in our archives about protective puts and other defensive strategies. I encourage you to check those out for a deep dive into those strategies. We're going to focus more today on how to protect gains in your portfolio, because that is a scenario that I know a lot of you right now are faced with. And quite frankly, it's not a bad problem to have. The market's been running for quite a bit now. We're in an extended bull market period, so a lot of you are probably sitting on gains in your trading account. And also, as a result of this extended rally in the underlying, we're seeing volatility start to come off across a lot of products. So that translates into an ideal scenario, an ideal use case for options, the protective scenario, the hedging use case that options were really designed for. And so right now you're sitting on your broad portfolio, maybe some individual underlyings. They've rallied quite a bit, and you're saying to yourself, what can I do to make sure that I lock these gains in, but I also want to stay around a little bit because this rally seems to have some legs in it, and I don't want to cut out and sell and go to cash right away. I want to see if I can get a little bit more upside out of this. Well, there's a lot of great ways for you to do that. Dan, you must be getting this question from your clients and mentees a lot right now. This seems to be that time. Vol is low. The market's been rallying for a while. I would wager that a lot of the people coming to Market Taker right now have this exact scenario in mind. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. When the market's up, people are typically, even though with options you don't have to be long the market, you can play it short, play it neutral, play it volatile, whatever you want. But typically I think more people are bullish on the market overall than bearish. And, after you see a run like we've had, people want to hold on to that money and still have upside appreciation and not just cash out altogether.
Yeah, and of course the vast majority of the retail public, and indeed the vast majority of the people listening to this show, I would wager, are heavily bullish or lean on that bullish side of the spectrum, so they're running long. If you're short, these strategies also work for you, but in reverse. I know that's a small minority of our listeners out there, and if you are short, you're probably worried about getting more capital than anything else right now. But let's start off with the basics, because it is basic training after all. Of course, the easiest, most straightforward, simplest way to protect your individual equity holding or protect your portfolio is to just buy a put on it, straight up put. A lot of different ways to do that. We've talked about that in a lot of detail on previous episodes. But right now, since we're focusing on protecting gains, you may want to spend a little bit more for some of that protection. Remember, in a typical protective put scenario, a lot of people come in, they might buy 3%, 5%, 10% out of the money puts because they're cheaper. They don't mind a little bit of pullback in the underlying. They want to draw that line in the sand somewhere farther down. But if you're looking to protect gains, now you're talking a little bit different equation. Now you're talking about having to pony up a little bit to really get decent protection. You're talking at the money or very near out of the money puts, because remember, if you buy a 10% out of the money put, then all those gains you made in your underlying, all that 10% are going to be wiped away before that put really kicks in. So that doesn't really serve the purpose we're talking about here today, which is protecting your gains. So keep that in mind when you're going to look into this, protect your gains, that you're probably going to have to shell out a little bit of money to do this. And we have a listener question that gets into some more specifics about that later, so we'll dive into that later. But in a nutshell, you should be prepared to shell out some money to do it, because at the end of the day, you're buying good protection now. You're not buying some out-of-the-money stuff. You're buying really decent at-the-money, probably in the 3 to 6 month time frame to really protect your portfolio. So that's the easiest way to do it, the most straightforward, probably one of the ways to shell out the most money too, is just to come in and buy that put. Now, that's really easy to do if you're just long a bunch of, let's say, Apple, like I know a lot of you are, and you want to now, stock's been rallying, you want to buy some puts to hedge. Pretty easy to determine where you want to break even, where you want to have your gains protected from, and then buy a put at that level and determine the amount of premium you want to pay, and then you're done. That's an easy trade to do. But it gets a little bit more complicated when you have a broad portfolio that you want to protect. Let's say you have a little bit of Apple, maybe a little bit of Google, a little bit of some oil services names, maybe a few others mixed in there. A whole bunch of different stuff. Now the question becomes a little bit more difficult. Of course, you can go off and buy protective puts on each of those individual underlyings. It's certainly an effective way to get a lot of protection and really make it perfectly suited to your portfolio. The downside, again, is that's going to be very expensive. because you're buying puts on every single underlying. That's a way to shell out a lot of money. But you can do it that way if you really want the most effective custom type of protection. Another way to do it takes a little bit more work and a little bit more effort is, of course, you have to really spend some time analyzing your portfolio. Thankfully, there's a lot of brokerage firms will provide tools to help you do this. You want to essentially determine the effective beta of your portfolio, how correlated your portfolio is to a particular index. Could be the S&P, could be the Russell if you have a lot of small cap, could be the NASDAQ if you have a lot of tech in your portfolio. Whatever the case may be, determine the most effective index for you and then help to determine that beta. And then once you have that correlation to the markets, you can easily do a little calculation to determine essentially how many effective shares of that index you have. So let's say if you're looking at your correlation to the S&P, then you can crank out, okay, I own 500 effective shares of SPY, or perhaps the Russell, or perhaps the Qs, whatever your index of choice or index of correlation may be. Dan, before I move on really quickly, I know a lot of people must come to you with this question. Do you have any tools you recommend to do this, or any particular platforms you think are the most effective at taking, let's say, a broad portfolio and condensing it down into a number that you can then easily translate into how many shares of SPY you need to hedge?
Well, I think a lot of the options-friendly brokerage firms these days just give you that for free. You know, it just comes with the package if you open an account. And, Thinkorswim does that, Trade Monster. I'd say at least half the option-friendly online brokerage accounts will help you sort of aggregate your portfolio and then subsequently beta weight it into one single distilled number that makes it really, really easy just to execute some either SPX or SPY, or maybe they'll even beta weight it into other choices besides SPX and SPY. But it's really great when they do that and give you that one single distilled number, and then you can just use the delta and say, okay, I need this many puts, done.
It is amazing what tools we have at our disposal for free these days, isn't it?
It's incredible. Yeah. I think we've talked about this on the show in the past. Like, I remember when I was making markets in the mid 90s, paying $1,000 or $1,500 or whatever it was a month for like this ultra super high speed software that's like 20% as good as what any option friendly online brokerage account gives their retail customers for free these days.
Yeah. I had the same experience. I walked onto the floor with a handheld for the first time, I believe it was in 1997. And it was like I walked down there with voodoo. People were making the sign of the devil at me. What is this monstrosity you've brought on to the floor with you? And that was just updating my Greeks on a real-time basis, and that was voodoo. And I didn't have any of this cool stuff, like you could calculate your beta and all the other stuff like that. It didn't even auto-hedge for me. I had to add that a couple years later to actually calculate the delta and auto-hedge for you. But it's just amazing what is available now. I think if you're a new retail customer, maybe you don't really appreciate just how much is going into these platforms. You mentioned Monster. They have some interesting news coming out with them and Options House. We'll get to that later. There's a listener question about that as well. But that all speaks to the evolving arms race on the brokerage side of the fence. But you're right. There are a lot of great tools, listeners, that you can take advantage of for free, usually at your broker of choice, to do this calculation for you. If you don't have a broker that does it for you, maybe you want to contact them and say, hey, this is the tool you should add because this is very useful for people who trade options. But hopefully you have that tool readily available. If not, you can probably search online and find some tools that might be able to do it as well. But nothing's going to replace your broker because they have access to all your positions. It's just much easier to find that beta weight and then take that conversion into whatever index of choice it is, SPY, Qs, Russell, and now you know exactly how many protective puts you need to buy to effectively hedge your portfolio. And once you have that number in hand, it's really the same math as with the protective put on a single individual underlying. You just need to determine to yourself how much you're willing to pay for that protection, how much of your gains you actually want to lock in. And then once you have that number, that level in your head, you can go out and buy your puts and you're all set. So that's the basic protective put on an individual underlying or indeed on a broad-based portfolio. Of course, like I mentioned, you're going to spend some money to do this. Now, there are ways to reduce that. The most expensive way, of course, is the way we just outlined. Come in, just buy an outright at the money or near out of the money protective put 3 to 6 months out, and now you've shelled out X% and you're done. But that's expensive. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't do this is because they have a hard time looking at their portfolio and say, bam, there goes 2% of my gains just to protect what I've already made. That could be a difficult road for a lot of people to hoe. So there are other alternatives you can do to reduce that outlay somewhat. The first one is pretty much perfect for protecting gains, what we're talking about today. It's buying a put spread instead of a put. So now you buy your very effective at the money or perhaps slightly out of the money puts, and then you write the short leg of that spread, usually around where your break-even point is in the underlying. So that way you've essentially and effectively hedged all the gains in that underlying. That protection, of course, will cost less, but it will also end around your break-even in the underlying. So if the underlying continues to drop beyond that point, you need to make your choice, and hopefully you do that ahead of time as to what you're actually going to do. Perhaps you work a limit order in the underlying at that price, so you sell out the underlying, and then you've protected your gains. You close out the position at that point, because if it drops to that level, you've probably changed your fundamental opinion of the underlying. And so you're out of everything, and you've locked in those gains for a reduced cost. Again, that's the part most people are concerned with. They're concerned with keeping those profits as opposed to not losing money. So if you do it that way, it's going to save you a little bit of money, and then you're off to the races. Dan, is that the way you typically construct your protective put spreads as well? I know there's different ways of doing it. Do you usually have the short leg around the break-even point, maybe a little bit above, a little bit below? How do you typically construct these types of put spreads when you want to protect yourself, protect your gains, but also save a little money in the process?
Well, as far as the long strike goes, I mean, that's sort of the operative strike. Well, I mean, actually, both of the strikes, the long strike and the short strike, both serve really, really important roles. As far as the long strike, yeah, I mean, probably a really simple, straightforward go-to way of constructing it is just like you said, buy the put around your break even, and then you're pretty well protected. You can get a little bit more aggressive from that by buying a higher strike put that has a higher delta, and you would do that in a scenario where, hey, you know what, maybe I'm really, really antsy about this market and I want a little bit more protection, so I'm willing to buy a somewhat more expensive put for that higher delta that's going to protect me right away in the short term. And it's going to, delta is one way of looking at it in the short term. In the long term, if you're going to hold the spread until expiration, look at it as just sort of a lower deductible. Like, okay, I'm buying this insurance, but, I don't have $1,000 deductible on my car insurance. I only have $100. It's going to kick in pretty much right away. And when you buy a higher strike put, that's what's going to happen. Lower strike put is when maybe you're willing to give up a little bit more and not get quite so much protection. And then, of course, you save money on what you pay for the put. And as far as the short strike goes, I mean, the thing to consider is, on the one hand, you might say, well, why am I limiting my protection? And that is definitely a valid consideration. I mean, you don't necessarily want to be limiting your protection, but especially when we're talking about the broad market, like the S&P 500, like we were, it's not going to go to zero. I mean, it's possible for a stock to go to zero. It's a pretty unlikely scenario to happen in just, one trading session. Could happen. But the S&P 500 isn't going to go to zero. So there's a limit to the risk you need. And when you sell another put, you bring in some money. You bring in a credit to offset some of what you're paying for that long put, for the actual protection. So, I'm okay with that. The way you would select a short strike is, how far do I think the market can fall in, one trading session or two trading sessions? Like, where's a reasonable bottom for this? That's one technique. And, another is just see what sort of trade-off you're willing to accept. Hey, I can offset 50% of the cost of my put, but I'm only protected between here and here.
Yes, it's always about trade-offs at the end of the day, isn't it? When you're talking protection, you're talking trade-offs, and there are ways to make those trade-offs look a little bit more favorable for your portfolio. And of course, one of the ways to do that is to go beyond the traditional put or even just the put spread like Dan just outlined. I've talked many times on this show and other shows on our network about the collar. It is a fantastic position for a lot of you out there in this exact scenario, as well as a lot of financial advisors love this position. I've called it the holy grail options position for financial advisors in the past. Of course, very simple. You buy this protective put. In the case we're talking about, you want to protect your gains. So you're going to buy a pretty meaty, pretty expensive put, probably somewhere around the at the money level. So now you have a significant outlay you're looking at reducing. How do you do that? Well, you write an out of the money call. And what level of out of the money call is really up to you. Of course, I would just caution you, people sometimes fall in love with the collars and they want to construct a collar that will cost them no money. So they want to create what's called the zero cost collar because it's free protection. But I would just remind you that oftentimes you get what you pay for. And if you build a collar solely to the purpose of paying no money for it rather than constructing the ideal collar for the amount of protection you want, you're probably going to end up perhaps buying a 3 or 5 or 8% out of the money puts. So you're not going to protect all those gains like we talked about. And you probably have to write a very near-term out-of-the-money call to finance that. And so now you don't get much upside and you don't really protect as much as you wanted to on the downside. But you didn't pay any money for that. So that's a trade-off you need to weigh in your own head to see if that's ideal. I just encourage you, if you're one of these people out there who like zero-cost collars, perhaps investigate paying a little bit of money, because at the end of the day, if you want to protect your gains, you're going to have to shell out a little bit of money to do that. If you take away no other lesson from this episode today, take away that one. The other way to do it to reduce your outlay even further is what I like to call the collar with a kicker. This is buying that protective at the money or near at the money put, selling that near out of the money call, and also to add an additional income layer to the trade, now selling out of the money put as well. So essentially you're buying a put spread and then selling a call against it. And this has all the benefits we talked about before of just buying the put spread. Of course, that reduces your outlay. Selling the call reduces your outlay. Combining the two, and you may have a scenario where you could reduce a substantial amount of the outlay of your protection. But again, remember that only protects you to wherever that short leg is of the spread. So if you want to protect your gains, this could be a good way to do it, but just have some sort of strategy in your back pocket or perhaps working a limit order in place of, so if you break through that strike to the downside, you have something in place to curtail that underlying, sell it out, whatever the case may be, so that you're not left holding the bag, because you're only protecting your gains in that scenario, and you want to make sure you don't lose money at the end of the day. And there are more advanced ways to pay for and finance your protection. These get into a little bit more of the time spread type scenario we've talked about on previous shows. If you want to learn more about those, I encourage you to go back to check out those advanced time spread and calendar spread episodes that we did. I know a lot of you did, and a lot of you have written in about them. A lot of you are confused about time spreads, so I won't go into too much detail about them here, except to say there are a lot of ways you can construct time spreads to really be very effective to help pay for protection. In fact, that's one of the primary use cases we see for the weekly options these days, is combining them into some sort of spread with a longer-term protective element. Let's say you buy a 3-month or a 6-month protective put near at the money, so it's relatively expensive, and then you try to finance that with a succession of short weekly type puts. Now, again, this is a scenario that requires a little bit of babysitting, a little bit of management, a little bit of expertise. You need to know what to do if the underlying drops below that short strike in the weekly side, because, again, you have a short gamma position now that could come back to bite you. So if that stuff sounds crazy and a little bit intimidating, just forget I mentioned that last one. But if you are a little bit more experienced, you can understand short gamma positions and how to deal with them, then this could be a scenario for you. You could roll those puts effectively every week, and as we talked about many times on the show in the past, you're capturing that exponential part of the theta curve, of the decay curve, and if you continue to do that over the lifespan of that protective put, you will usually end up financing some, if not all, of the cost of that put over time. So you're trading free protection for a lot more management, a lot more time investment in managing this position. But if you're okay with that trade-off, then that's a great way to do it. Dan, is that a strategy you like to utilize a lot? Maybe a 3-month protective put with a series of weeklies used to finance it?
Yeah, I mean, what I prefer to use especially with more sophisticated students who, it's not their first exposure to options or anything. I like setting up collars that way, and that's sort of notwithstanding what you said about the zero cost collar. You kind of have the same problems with doing it the way I'm talking about. So it's not for the faint of heart. It's something that really needs to be monitored on a day-to-day basis. But I like buying a put at a level that you're comfortable with, that's a long-term put, and then financing that longer-term put with either 1-month calls or even, weekly or every 2-week calls. And so then the problem that creates potentially is that you're selling calls very close to the money with a put that's further from the money, which, you don't want to end up getting assigned on the call that you're short. So you really have to monitor it and try and avoid that. And you'll run into problems time to time. So you have to be nimble enough to adjust and adapt to what's going on in the market. But that's the way I like to talk to my students about hedging, is doing it in the collar capacity more than the put spread capacity, although the put spread one's fine too.
Yeah, I think that's probably easier for some people to wrap their heads around, too. They can understand the collar, even if it is a time collar. That should be a good name for a movie, Time Collar. The sequel, Jean-Claude Van Damme sequel, 20 years later, Time Cop. So, of course, the collar is a little bit easier for people to understand, and it does work. So whichever way your bread is buttered, whichever way you like to do that, it's effective. If you can't handle having a long put and a short put in that type of time spread scenario, long put and a short call could be easier to wrap your head around. Again, you still have that same babysitting requirement either way, whichever way you go. You have to watch those positions to make sure you don't have them go against you. But other than that, they can be very effective ways to finance long-term protection. All right, so that's our summary, our rundown on what to do if you're sitting on some gains in the market right now, and I'm sure a lot of you are. There are definitely worse problems to have. But if you don't take advantage of options in this scenario, you're really missing out, because this is the ideal scenario. This is what options were invented for. They were invented to essentially allow you to protect long positions while still maintaining your exposure in the marketplace. So if you're just sitting there and your only alternatives are to be long or go to cash, then you're missing out on everything we talked about on the show for all the many episodes that we've done now. So go ahead, take a look at your positions, and then listen to some of the strategies we outlined here, and maybe one of those will be suitable for you. If you have questions, you have comments, you know where to find us. Meanwhile, we're going to get to some of those questions right now, because it's time for the mail call.
Mail call. Time to look at questions submitted by our listeners.
Again, another transition that puts me in a festive flag memorial July 4th type of mood, which I guess is good for the time frame we are recording this right after Memorial Day here in the States, listeners. So we are in that summer type of mindset here. A lot of great questions coming in. First off, we have a question, very timely one, just came in last night from a listener, goes by the handle Big Charlie, and he writes, "Hey guys, what's your take on the Options House Trade Monster merger? What does this mean for the options landscape going forward?" Great question there, Mr. Big Charlie. If you're not familiar with what he's talking about, just last night, we are recording this on May 28th, so just last night there was an announcement that two of the smaller second-tier type options brokers, Options House and Trade Monster, are going to be merging, combining into one mega broker. It is an interesting development. I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. All these great tools that you have at your disposal for these brokers, it costs money to develop those. So it is becoming a very expensive proposition to maintain an options broker. I mean, we do this show, obviously we have done this show in the past with our friends over there at Sogo. They can tell you as well how expensive it is to be a smaller second-tier type broker in the option space, because you are competing with very large firms. Charles Schwab obviously brought Options Express, bringing a lot of resources to bear in that area. TD Ameritrade bought Thinkorswim, obviously bringing a lot of resources to bear in that area. So there are now deep pockets arrayed in the options brokerage space. If you want to compete with those, you need deep pockets. You need economies of scale. And for a lot of these smaller brokerage firms, they simply don't have that. One way to get that is to merge. We saw that with Trade King and Zecco last year. They acquired Zecco. Now they're one of the larger second-tier options brokerage firms, and that's been good for them. It's given them a lot of economies of scale, new accounts. Options House and Trade Monster clearly saw the writing on the wall and decided to take the same approach. Dan, what's your take on this? I know you have some experience with the Options House guys over there.
Yeah, I mean, Options House and Trade Monster are both, they're smaller tier firms that have been working hard the past couple of years trying to not be a smaller tier firm, and didn't really get the traction I imagine that they were looking for. I mean, maybe they did. I don't know. I don't have any real insight into either of their business plans. But even though this show is geared to more of the retail audience, like in the industry among professionals, I don't think it's any secret that a lot of people go out and try and start brokerage firms so that later they can sell them. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that Options House or Trade Monster, that was their objective or wasn't their objective, but I think there's a lot of firms that start up that way, hoping to one day cash in and make $10 million or something. But, that's probably the hardest way in the world there is to make $10 million.
Yeah, there are definitely easier roads to hoe. That's your desired course of action.
I've seen a number of brokerage firms start up, some from the inside and some from the outside, because I knew a lot of people there, was just sort of a casual observer. And almost every brokerage firm that I'm familiar with who set a launch date for when they're going to go live, they didn't actually go live until a long time after that.
Great question, Big Charlie. Glad to see you have your fingers on the pulse of the options landscape. And will be interesting to see. I would imagine this will put even more pressure on the remaining smaller second-tier type options brokers to have to merge or acquire someone else just to stay relevant and competitive and bring those same economies of scale to bear. All right, next up we have more of a comment here coming in from Justin. He writes, "Hi, Mark. Just heard my question on the podcast. Awesome. Thank you so much. Keep doing what you do, and I'll keep listening." Well, Justin, thanks for writing in with such great questions. I believe you featured your question on our last episode of Options Bootcamp. We love all the questions from all you guys out there in the listening audience. That's one of the reasons why we do this show, is to get your feedback, to get your questions and your comments, so we could tailor the show to what you guys need to know. So glad you're listening, Justin. Glad you're enjoying the programs. Keep it up. Another one we have here, before we get into this mega question/comment, we have another one here. This is very timely for what we're talking about today. This comes from Niles F. He writes, "How much of my portfolio should I allocate to defensive strategies such as protective puts? Thank you for answering my question and for producing this fine program." Well, you're welcome to the second part of your question there, Niles. We love producing this show. Again, you guys are the reason we do this. You can really get a lot of benefit out of this. And so that you guys can utilize these strategies, because we really believe that these are in the best interest of you guys, the retail trader. If you're not using options, you're really doing something wrong in a lot of our eyes, because essentially these are designed to help you guys and to protect, to hedge, generate income. I know the ODD says options are not suitable for everyone, but I think most of us here on this program will agree that they probably are suitable for most scenarios. That said, your specific question, how much should you allocate to defensive strategies? This is kind of, I mentioned the collar being the holy grail. This is the $10 million question in the option space. If you go to a new hedge fund or a pension fund or a trading fund or a big trader and tell them, hey, they should use options to protect their positions, they come back with a similar question. How much should I be spending on these things? It is a very, very, very controversial and interesting question. I tend to fall around the rule of thumb of somewhere in the 1.5%, probably closer to 2% range. Now, bear in mind, this is for serious protection. This is for 3 to 6 month puts that is at the money or close to at the money, so that you're getting some real serious protection. This is not a 10% out of the money put where you want to just kind of break even on your underlying position. If that's the case, you could save more money. And of course, you can save money using the strategies we just outlined. But at the end of the day, you should be prepared to pay around 1.5% to 2% for real effective protection. At the end of the day, insurance, protection, whatever you want to call it, it costs money, particularly the good stuff. And you think about options as a deductible. The lower your deductible, the more money you're going to have to pay. So the closer you get to that at-the-money strike, the more money you're going to have to pay. So if you're talking about real protection, somewhere in the 3 to 6 month range, probably figure around 2%. And I've done informal surveys, talking to different people in the industry, people who work with a lot of financial advisors and others, using options to kind of gauge their sentiment on this. And they seem to come back around the 2% range as well. That seems to be the decent rule of thumb, the decent medium. Dan, where do you fall on this? What do you think someone should be allocating? What percentage of their portfolio to this type of strategy? Is 2% right in your eyes? Do you think it should be more, should be less?
I think for an investor, you're probably right on the money. You know, for a trader, it's just a whole different paradigm. Like, I think as a trader, you already have risk limits set into your whole methodology, and you know that, hey, you know, if the market falls 10%, the most I could lose is this. So as far as option traders, people who are more active, putting on credit spreads and iron condors and time spreads and straddles and such, totally different paradigm. But for investors, yeah, I think what you stated there is pretty reasonable. 1.5%, 2%, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're trading in and out, then you're not really looking at hedging in the traditional sense. You're looking at more, you know, managing your position and getting out at the appropriate time. It's a different beast. You know, just allocating 2% to a protective put strategy, and that's kind of it, on which a lot of the retail side of the fence are doing. So I hope that answers your question, Niles. If you're okay with that outlay, then that's where you should be focusing on, somewhere in that percentage range. All right, next up we have a question from Kaiser Dog 76. He writes into a lot of our shows here on the network, and he's actually referring to an episode we did. I believe you missed this one, Dan. This was John and I talking about the mini options. Maybe before we do that, really quickly, because you didn't have a chance to weigh in on that episode, what's your take in a nutshell on the minis? Do you recommend them to your clients at all, or do you think they're pretty much useless at this point?
I think they have a certain utility. There's a lot of people out there who are interested in trading, who want to do it. but they don't have 50 grand to drop into a portfolio and start trading. You know, they have a $5,000 account and they want to trade Priceline or something like that. It's impossible to trade the stock, of course. It's kind of hard to trade a typical call of something like Priceline that has a really, really high price tag associated with the underlying stock. And thus, because options are priced off a percentage of the stock, the options are consequently expensive. Minis can make sense in very niche situations like that. For smaller traders who want to trade big stuff, it's the only way that they're going to be able to have access to it. So under the right circumstance, I think it can make sense.
I think we were a little bit more dismissive of minis on the show. We did. But in general, I agree with you. Theoretically, they were very interesting, and they had a great theoretical use case. The practical implementation of them in the marketplace left a lot to be desired. The fees were too high. The spreads were too wide. There was no reason for anyone to actually use them because at the end of the day, you were paying a lot of money to use them, and the whole purpose of these products is to save money and to be appropriate for smaller account sizes. So it just never seemed to come together for these. And then one thing we pontificated on in that episode was perhaps if the upcoming 7-for-1 split in Apple is going to be the beginning of the end for minis. I just got some interesting information on that. Well, first we'll get to this story/question from Kaiser Dog, and then we'll dive into it. He shares with us one of his own stories on the mini front. He writes, funny story, I was trading on my iPad. It is the summer of 2013. CNBC is on, but I am not paying attention to it. I had some cash to play with, and there was some electricity in the air that day. So he's doing a good job of setting the mood here. I settled in on Apple options. This was the first and last time I used mini options. In total, I spent $2,800 in capital for options. $1,400 I spent on 3 or 4 regular Apple options. Then I spent an equal amount on Apple mini options. This was when Apple was trading below 400, if memory serves true. Well, no sooner than 10 minutes after I had completed my order and was filled on those calls, some guy named Carl Icahn came out and made his first, quote, famous Apple tweet. Laugh my butt off, I shall say, family program. And he goes on to write, I got an instant $20 move on the stock. My calls I had just bought exploded as they were now deep in the money. On the regular Apple options, I instantly made several $1,000s. You know what I made on those minis? After commissions and such, it was a few $100. I was so angry and I felt just ripped off, so I've never touched a mini again. Why would I? With that kind of move and you still cannot make any real money, forget about it. Minis are dead to me. And he goes on with a question about the VIX. Before I get into that really quickly, this kind of gets into what we were saying on the last episode, that minis aren't really ideal. They're not even ideal for this use case that they were designed for the small accounts, putting a little bit of money to work because, again, the commissions and the spreads are so wide that you're not making any money even when you're using them in the right scenario, even when the underlying goes your way. It's still not an ideal scenario. To that end, I did just receive an email actually during the show, which is kind of interesting. A friend of mine at a brokerage firm sent me this, which is a market system status message that the brokers receive from the different exchanges. This one came from NASDAQ, and they said, effective at the opening of business on Wednesday, May 28th, which is today, the time we're recording this, NASDAQ options market and NASDAQ OMXBX will no longer add additional series to the mini options. That's for all the classes of mini options, Apple, GLD, Google, and others. There shall be no restrictions on opening transactions in the mini options, and therefore such options will not be limited to closing transactions. Only contact NASDAQ if you want more information. So there you have it. One exchange is essentially delisting them, or at least preventing any future listing of minis. And if we've seen one thing is that other exchanges will certainly follow suit. So it seems like our predictions were unfortunately correct, Dan. This might be the beginning of the end of minis.
Yeah, well, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, my comments were not necessarily championing them by any stretch of the imagination.
No. You are the minis champion. That's how you were labeled now. I'm going to send you a hat that says minis on them.
Oh, man.
There's no backpedaling now, sir. You're in it.
No, I've been watching Game of Thrones lately, and I don't know. I almost came up with a really whacked out reference, but I'm not going to.
Does that mean I have to behead you now or something?
Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, my comments weren't necessarily really championing minis. It's the very specific, narrow use that they could possibly make some sense isn't really worth all the time and effort that it costs the exchanges and the clearing firm and brokerage firms. I mean, when a new product like that is released, it's not like the brokerage firms just snap their fingers and there they are. There's reprogramming and there's a whole lot of work and effort and time and money that has to happen to make stuff like that happen. So, I mean, I can see it not working out because the the sliver of utility that they serve, I can't imagine can be cost effective really to anyone in this business, including the end user.
And one of the interesting things I did talk about at my series of conversations down at the Options Industry Conference, you can check a lot of those out now on the website, listeners, and on iTunes, wherever you find our Options Insider radio program. More of those are coming out in the coming weeks, is exactly this, the surprising rise and now fall of minis. And I got a lot of different people's feedback on why they thought these products didn't succeed. I can never remember in my time in the options business anyway, a product launch with so much fanfare, get so much support behind it, and then just fizzle and die within such a short period. They only launched in March of last year, so they've literally been listed less than a year and a half, and they're already pretty much done. So that's a surprising and shocking life cycle for a product that was billed in the early days as this was going to be it. This was going to be the one that was going to bring retail back to the trading market. This was going to be the product that brought a lot of these reticent customers into the options fold. It was going to be the minis. And then for a variety of reasons that we outlined on this program and a lot of our Options Insider Radio interview programs down at OIC, that just did not come to pass. All right. I wanted to interrupt that story with that bit of breaking news here. Now on to his actual question.
This is like a mini-series.
I know. This is like an epic story, kind of like your Game of Thrones. Kaiser Dog goes on to ask, with the VIX flirting with 11, I wish I bought some calls today too. Laugh out loud. He likes his abbreviations here. So if I do not have a futures account, what is the best way for me to hedge using volatility? Please help a hopeless bull who wants to get into insurance. Thanks for all the insight and education. Well, if you're a hopeless bull, Mr. Kaiser Dog, I think this episode we did today is very well suited to you. The one thing I would say, if you do want to get into the VIX products, that it is getting much easier these days to open a futures account. It used to be a laborious process. You had to go through all these hoops and jump through all these bells and whistles. A lot of brokers have now acquired futures arms. I know OX has and others have as well. TD with Thinkorswim is adding more futures components all the time as well. So a lot of the firms are making it much easier to add a futures component. I know we have a lot of different accounts at a lot of different firms. We just did that at our account over at OX. It was just a couple of clicks, really. You have to virtually sign a document and bam, that's it. You don't have to deposit any more money. You just have a futures account now. So if that's your only obstacle, and that's becoming easier to surmount. That said, I would perhaps question some of your initial use case for the VIX and for volatility. I've never really seen it as a good hedge. I've always taken issue with people who view VIX and volatility as a hedge because there isn't that one-to-one correlation. If your portfolio drops, if the S&P 500 drops, VIX isn't guaranteed to pop. It's its own beast these days. There are a lot of products pulling and tugging on that, all the different ETNs and ETPs pulling VIX in all sorts of different directions. And it may not necessarily move the way you want it to. There are many days when the S&P drops and the VIX drops, the S&P rallies, the VIX rallies. Those are not ideal scenarios if you want that product to perform as a hedge. So I might take issue with your initial use case. That said, there are plenty of ways to use volatility as a hedge. I would probably be much more of a fan of the direct way to do that. Remember, at the end of the day, VIX is theoretically, there are some other components to it now, but theoretically, the implied volatility of the SPX, the S&P 500 options. So if you want to go out there and use SPY or buy SPY puts or buy SPX puts or put spreads, that is a much more effective way to buy implied volatility in the S&P 500 and also have a direct one-to-one correlated product that if the underlying drops, you know those puts are going to gain in value. That's something you can bank on. So that's a much more tangible, useful way to use volatility as a quote-unquote hedge. That said, I don't discount use cases for the VIX. I think the VIX, in my opinion, maybe Dan, you might differ on this, but in my opinion, VIX is best used as a kicker to augment those types of strategies. So if you're worried about a near-term downside drop in the S&P 500 and perhaps a corresponding pop in the VIX, then you buy a put or a put spread in SPY or the SPX to do what we talked about today, to protect those immediate gains and to get definite demonstrable protection there that you can rely on. Well, that's important. And then if you want to add maybe an additional component and you're not afraid to outlay a little bit more money, then you can buy a VIX upside call, VIX upside call spread, and do a lot of different strategies there to take advantage of the scenario where in case the VIX does pop, now you're making money on your put spread and you're making extra money, that kicker, on the VIX moving to the upside. But if VIX doesn't pay off, it's not the end of the world for you. You still have that put spread in place to protect you. So that's kind of my ideal use case for a VIX product. I would encourage you also stay away from these popular ETNs like VXX and XIV. These are constructed very poorly. A lot of people use them in a buy and hold scenario, which is not the way they were designed at all. These things get crushed by roll yield. VXX loses anywhere from 5 to 15% a month on roll yield because they're buying expensive longer-term VIX futures, selling cheaper near-term VIX futures. That's not a long-term recipe for making money. So if you're buying VXX with the plan to hold it more than a few hours or a few trading sessions, then you're going to get crushed by that product. So I would probably encourage you to stay clear of those. And if you want to use volatility, probably go in the ways I outlined. That said, Dan, maybe you completely disagree with that. Let's get into a little crossfire here. What's your response here for our friend Mr. Kaiser Dog?
Jane, you ignorant. No, wait, never mind. Yeah, well, we've kind of talked about this before on the show, probably a couple of times, and I don't remember if I cited this, but one of the fun things that I get to do here with the Options Insider Radio Network is I do the morning podcast. It's a daily options news rundown. And so I get to read a lot of articles about options, which I would otherwise just simply ignore because I don't like to read the news. And I came across one maybe a month or so ago citing Robert Whaley, who is the guy who invented basically the VIX and helped to create the VIX contract. And he was quoted, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here and bastardizing this somewhat, but he basically came out and said the VIX and VIX futures and VIX options were never intended to be a long-term investment. And that's what a lot of people use them for. Like they think they're doing something good for themselves by investing in things like VXX and, buying VIX futures long-term and that kind of thing. And the guy who invented this, like the smartest guy in the world on the VIX, said this was never intended for this reason. So I don't know. I mean, I talk to people about this all the time. People who come to me and say, hey, I want to learn to hedge with VIX options or VIX futures. And I do my best to talk them out of it. And I know some of these guys just read this sexy stuff online about VIX ETNs and all that, and they don't listen to me, and they end up losing money. And, if you just get so stubborn that you just want to invest in this thing that was never intended to be invested in, I don't know. Again, not trying to sound callous, but, you've got to put some thought into exactly why this product was designed. That's not really why it's designed. Even as a hedge, it only functions as a hedge 80% of the time. 20% of the time, it moves in the same direction. So if you lose on the market, you also lose on volatility. So, keep it simple. I mean, options are complicated enough. We just spent this whole episode here today talking about buying puts and collars and that kind of thing. If you don't have that totally mastered, you have no business trying to take on an even more complicated way of hedging.
It's too late, Dan. You've already been labeled as the callous, cold-hearted one here on the show. So whereas I reach out to the listeners, I embrace them. You scoff and scorn them at every opportunity. So there you go. All right, listeners. On that tip of embracing the listeners, I will indeed thank you all for writing in with such great questions. Keep them coming. You know how to do it by now. Find us on the website, theoptionsinsider.com. Use the mobile app. Hit that email button in there. Or find us on social media, twitter.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider. Or do it the old-fashioned way. Send us an email, questions@theoptionsinsider.com. Just be sure to put in the subject line, question for Options Bootcamp, so we know which show you are referring to. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have on this episode of Options Bootcamp. But before we go, let me check in with my cohort here, my partner in crime on the old drill instructor squad, to see what he has cooking that may interest you. Mr. Market Taker, I hear you have some cool stuff cooking in the elite land. What's coming down the pike from Market Taker mentoring these days?
Oh, I've always got cool stuff cooking over here, Mark. We are about to do our in-person class at the SIBO, the one where we have the Cubs game reception following it. We've got some awesome little surprises planned. I'm telling you about it, but unfortunately, you're not able to sign up for it because the class is already closed. Just one of those things that I'm excited about. And the next thing that we're doing after this is we are going to take applications for one-on-one coaching. The last time you guys heard me talk about this was about 5 months ago. We do it. I used to say we do it 3 or 4 times a year, and then I had to say we do it 3 times a year. I think this year we're only going to accept applications for coaching probably twice this year because we had so much interest last time that we couldn't accommodate anybody else until people graduate out of the program. And so now some people have graduated out of the program. So we're doing that. If you're on my email list, you'll be getting an email, and I'll tell you how you can try and get involved with our one-on-one coaching. And that's basically what's going on. That's exciting over here.
How does that graduation work? Is there a ceremony, cap and gown, diplomas? I'm envisioning a whole ceremony in my head. What's the market taker graduation process like?
Well, have you ever seen a pagan ritual in which they... Never mind.
It's a Saturnalia is what you're telling me, I see. Oh, that goes all sorts of interesting directions that I was not anticipating, yet I'm somehow intrigued by. All right. Before we go any further down the rabbit hole, I will call this one on behalf of Mr. Passarelli and, of course, myself. I want to thank all of you out there in the listening audience for downloading and streaming and subscribing to the program, and, of course, for sending in such great questions. Keep them coming, and I'll see you next time right here on Options Bootcamp.
Options Bootcamp is produced by the Options Insider, Inc. All rights reserved.
The preceding program was a production of the Options Insider Radio Network. For more quality options programs, visit www.theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app, available in iTunes and on Google Play. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, facebook.com/The Options Insider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.